Hello, welcome to Parallel Painting with Julia. Today we're going to be painting some Gerbera orange daisies with a periwinkle blue sky. We're going to be using an 11 by 14 canvas. The brushes we're using today are going to be a size 12 bristle brush. We have a size 12 pointed round brush, a size 6 pointed round brush, a size 4 bristle brush, and a detail brush. The paints we're going to be using today are Liquitex Basics. The colors we're going to be using are titanium white, primary blue, a little bit of purple, some cadmium yellow deep, cadmium red light, cadmium red medium, some ivory black, and a little bit of phthalo green. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is paint our background. This is a painting for absolute beginners. You don't need any experience whatsoever, and I'm going to walk you through the whole painting step by step. So we're going to take our size 12 bristle brush, and this is great actually for filling in backgrounds because it doesn't lay on the paint too thick. So we're going to take our brush, dip it in our water, and we're going to use our other hand to squeeze out any excess water. And the next thing we're going to do is mix up our background colors. So we're going to make what's called our mother color. So it's going to be our main color, and then we'll also do a lighter version and a darker version of that. So I'm going to take a little bit of blue and a little bit of purple, and I'm going to mix those in with white to get a nice periwinkle color. So if it looks a little too light, you can add a little bit more blue, a little bit more purple, and just keep mixing it up until you get it to where you like it. All right. So I'm going to take this color and I'm going to start to just fill in my canvas. I'm going to do horizontal brush strokes, but you could also do vertical if you wanted. Whatever works for you. You can add a little bit of water if you need help kind of blending it in a little bit. And I'm going to go almost to the top, and then I'm going to come back down, and I'm going to go almost to the bottom. I'm going to add just a little bit of water. This paint is a little thick. All right, so I've gone almost to the top, almost to the bottom. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a little bit lighter at the top. So I'm going to take more white and mix that in. And I'm going to go to the top with the lighter version. This paint is so thick, it's like moving my canvas around. And so what we're doing is we're creating a gradient. So a gradient is where you fade from one shade to the next. So up at the top we have a tint, so it's mainly mixed with white here. Go even a little bit lighter than that. And so to blend it in, I'm brushing down and back up and down and back up, and that will blend it in. Now at the bottom, I want darker, so I'm going to mix together some of my blue and purple with way less white, and I'm going to come down here at the bottom. And so if you get to a point where you have a clear separation, here's the lighter color, here's the darker color, and you want to blend that in, what you want to do is keep going up and keep going down. And you can see how those slowly just start to kind of fade together. And if you want to paint your edges, you can do that as well. You can just wrap this around the side. Okay, so I've decided I also want to add in some rolling clouds. Your background doesn't need to be completely dry to start this. For clouds, you usually want to use a filbert brush, although you could use one of the pointed brushes as well. So I'm going to take this brush, dip it in my water, dab it on my paper towel, and I'm going to start off with just some plain white paint. And my brush is a little bit wet here. So I'm going to have them just kind of rolling in diagonally across the canvas because I think that'll look good for this composition. So I'm going to start off, I'm using the rounded part of my brush. And you want a lot of variation. So maybe some brush strokes are really small and some are really big. And I'm going to even get kind of whimsical. And as I dip down, I'm going to have some that kind of even just have a little bit of a curve to them. Now I'm doing brush strokes going downwards. And I'm just kind of blocking in the shape right now. Now I'm going to take my brush and I'm only going to dip the right side in the white. And I'm going to go over this again. And I want there to be kind of a white highlight at the top. And you can dip again if you kind of run out. And then I'm going to go over these one more time at the top here to get it even brighter. And do some kind of sweeping motions down here. And now to make a darker color to go underneath the clouds, I'm going to take some of this blue and purple mixture that I had, and I'm going to mix a teeny bit of ivory black to get that a little bit darker and a little bit more gray. And I'm going to very lightly kind of feather this in underneath. Okay, so I'm just lightly kind of dabbing my brush. You can use a little water if you need to blend it in a little bit. But I guess I'm kind of going for a little bit of an ominous feel. I actually dreamt of this painting last night. And so I decided I wanted to share it with all of you. Okay, so now I'm going to get my brush wet a little bit, just to blend that in a little bit more. And I'm again going to go in and add in another little white highlight on some of these. And I can always come back and add a little bit more later. One thing I do think I want to do before I even move on though is I'm going to add just a teeny bit of yellow to really help these pop. So I'm going to take some white and I'm going to add the teeniest, tiniest bit of yellow in. See, look, even that's too much. You want it to just be the teeniest bit. And I'm going to take that and very lightly, I'm going to brush over some of these. And I have a little hair there, and that's always kind of a problem there. You won't really notice it. It's actually fine. But if you keep seeing it and you want to just pull it off, you might as well. Okay, so I got a teeny little bit of yellow in there. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start kind of a field down here in the background. So we're going to take our size 12 bristle brush, clean it out in your water, get all that background color out, squeeze out the excess water. And we are going to do a little bit of green. And your background doesn't need to be dry. Even if it's still a little wet, that's totally fine. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to mix a little bit of yellow and a little bit of green, maybe a little bit of my blue purple mixture here. And this brush, we want it nice and kind of fluffy and fanned out. And I'm very lightly going to go in and start to add some vertical brush strokes. So I don't like how this is kind of showing the texture of the canvas. So I'm going to add just a little bit of water. And I'm going to have these vertical brush strokes. They're going to go up. Have them go up over here more on the right side. And then I'm going to have it kind of be less and less as it comes down, and then maybe up just a little bit. So kind of framing by doing a little bit extra on the sides. And the brush stroke I'm using is vertical, but I'm very, very lightly, kind of barely touching the canvas. You could also go in with some of your periwinkle color from your sky. So I can take even some of our periwinkle from before and add that in. It kind of blends in just a little bit. I'm getting a little too much of that kind of light colored green. I'm going to clean my brush out, make sure it's fluffy, and I'm going to again grab my periwinkle color, and I'm going to do brush strokes going downward. Yeah, there we go. So we can get this very kind of nice faded look there in the background. The more you brush over something, the more it's going to blend in, so you want to keep that in mind. Okay, so now I'm going to start getting more in there with the greens. Again, I'm using my brush and I'm getting it a little bit wet for this, but still wanting it pretty fluffy. So now again, I'm going to take some, now I'll take more just yellow to get some kind of yellow areas. And now I'm going to dip in the blue, just kind of stamping. And a little bit of my phthalo green to get a little aqua in there. And that's going to be kind of my first layer there. I'm going to add a teeny bit of black now to get a darker shade. And it's also going to make it a little bit more neutral. And you can even go in with your Filbert brush and use the edge of your brush if you want to do some more defined kind of lines here in the front. And I'm going to use my Filbert to even get in here with a little bit more of my blue and purple mixture, and I'm going to add some streaks of that. Okay, so now for this front area, I do want it to be darker. I'm really going to get in there with some darker greens, so mixing some black in. Black and yellow always make a really nice, natural looking green. And then the last thing I'm going to do is just blend it in a little bit. So I'm cleaning out my brush, and I'm very lightly going to brush over it. I'm going to do some marks coming down too. And, you know, I still want the bottom a little bit darker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some more black. And I'm going to mix that in with my green. Add a little bit more yellow. And I'm going to darken this up. And we'll come in later and add some lighter tones over the top. All right, so before we move on to the flowers, I'm going to do one last step. I'm going to take my size 4 pointed brush, dip it in my water, and I'm going to do some very kind of defined grass so that we'll have a little bit of overlapping. So how this brush works, if you press down really hard, you can make a very thick line. If you very lightly glide along the canvas, you can make a very thin line. So what I like to do is kind of load my brush up with whatever color I want to use, and then maybe dip in some pure yellow. And I'm going to come in and just add some very defined grass. You can start up and come down, or whatever it is that you prefer. And I am going to use quite a bit of water for this. And that's nice because it's adding just a little bit of movement. And again, if it starts to kind of show the texture. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is gonna add a light layer of the daisies in the background. So you can clean your bristle brush out in your water. Sorry for all that clank-lanking. I've got like a billion brushes in there right now. Squeeze out your extra water, fluff it out, nice and fluffy, a little bit damp. And I'm lightly going to stamp in some of my yellow and some of my cadmium red light. And it's a little bit watery, and I'm going to use this as a stamp, and I'm very, very going to lightly tap the canvas. My brush is completely vertical, and back here we want to look at, so we're just lightly tapping. If you find yourself making the same kind of marks over and over again, then you can kind of turn your brush a different direction. And then as I get down here in the middle a little bit more, I'm going to start to do some bigger marks. So you can grab just a little bit more paint. I'm going to fill it in just a little bit more. And do a couple more larger marks down here in the foreground. And you don't want it to look even. So see how it looks like these are kind of all going in a row? I need to mess that up because that just doesn't look right. So maybe you'll make one that's a lot bigger. Let me cover that one up. So we want as much variation as possible. So I'm actually going to very lightly go in and stamp with some of my, oops, got a little white there, with some of my green color now. I'm working it to kind of fade a little bit. And at that point, if you want to go back over any of your tall blades of grass here that you did, you can do that too. Okay. So now you just want to sit back and let this dry a little bit before we come in with our larger daisies. While you wait, if you wanted to, you could go in and add a little bit more of your light yellow to your clouds if they've dried just a little bit. So you can come in and add just a little hint of yellow. You can use your finger if you get a little too much. And I'm not going to do it on all of them, but I'm definitely going to have like a little hint of that. All right, so now we're just going to wait for this to dry a little. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is start sketching in our orange daisies. So if you used your size 4 pointed brush before, go ahead and clean that out. And then we're going to grab some plain white water, or sorry, plain white paint. And we're going to grab some plain white paint. Keep in mind how much pressure you're applying. So I'm going to do kind of 3 main flowers, and then I'm going to have lots of smaller flowers in the background. And for this composition, I want one big one, and we're kind of doing a zigzag. So I'll have a medium-sized one and then a small one. That tends to be something I kind of lean towards. So I'm going to start over here with my medium-sized one. So I'm going to go to the bottom corner of my canvas. I'm going to go up about 4 or 5 inches and about 4 inches, somewhere in there. And that's where I'm going to sketch it in. So you can start off by just kind of drawing a V. And if your background isn't completely dry, that's okay while we're just outlining it. And then I'm going to have a stem, so I'm going to start from there. I'm just going to do a line that's kind of bending inward. And so for this one, I want the petals to kind of be aiming upwards at an angle. So I'm going to start out, come in, out, and come in. And I'm doing this in just white first, because although petals can be a little bit transparent and you can see the blue sky behind them, if you don't do any white underneath, then they're going to look a little bit dulled down, and that's not really what I'm going for. And I want some variation, so maybe one's really thin and then some are a little bit thicker. And you can also layer them on top. Have one really bending backwards here. And you may find you even like it in this kind of white color. You could just leave it. So those really skinny ones, I feel like make it look a lot more realistic. So let's see. I'm going to do maybe one more over here and then I might call it good. Okay, so if you get too much paint kind of built up on your brush, you can twist it in a circle on your paper towel and move on to your next one. So we've got our medium-sized one there. It's kind of popping up out of the field. Now for this next one, I'm going to have this one be really big. So it's going to kind of cover up a little bit of this cloud here. So I'm going to start off making the center of it. And sketch in kind of an oval. And then I'm going to have the petals coming out from there. So the ones in the back, we're going to do a little foreshortening. So they're going to appear to be shorter so that they look like they're further away. So they're going to be just little, short little petals. And grab just a little bit of water so I don't get it too thick, because we want this to dry quickly. And then as you come around, you can start to make them a lot bigger. So I'm starting out and coming in. And notice how I'm changing the angle of my brush and the angle of the petals. So the ones up here are bending up. And the ones down here are bending up, but they're kind of coming from the other side. So I'm going to add some more in here. Another layer. And again, some little thin ones have kind of a nice effect. And having some short and some long. And you want to be kind of thinking about the movement of the flower. How does it look like it's moving? If you do a lot of them that are really draping down far, then it's going to appear like a sad flower. So if that's not what you're going for, then you want to have some of them be a little bit more bouncy. So like here, I can have some bouncy ones bouncing up. So I'm going to go in and do kind of an inner layer. And you can fill in the center if you want, but that doesn't really matter because it's going to be dark in there. So we don't have to worry about that really. So see how I have it go down and then it goes up and it's shorter? That's the variation that you really want. So for the last little flower, I'm going to come on down here and I'm going to do a little teeny baby one. And I'm going to have this one kind of coming at us, but aiming up. So 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go right about in here. And again, oh, too much paint by a long, long shot. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do a little circle. And for this one, I'm going to have the petals bigger on the top and then shorter on the bottom, like they're really kind of coming at us. So right here, we're going to do major foreshortening. So they're going to appear really short. You can have a couple that are going to be like in the shadow. They come down kind of far and are a little bit bigger. Those will be our little shadow ones. But for the most part, we're going to have long ones in the back. And then these little short ones in the front. And then the last thing I'm going to add in is maybe a little skinny one in here somewhere. Maybe bending down a little bit. So you can also do your stems on these ones if you'd like. Too much paint on my brush there. And same thing with this one. Maybe this one's going to come. All right, so those are going to be our 3 main daisies. So while we're waiting for those to dry, that white to dry a little bit, we can come in and do some little medium-sized ones in between. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to take some yellow with my size 4 round brush, and maybe I'll come in maybe over here and have one coming off the edge of the canvas. So you can apply the same techniques we've been doing. So maybe sketch in a little oval. You can even dip your brush in white and yellow at the same time. And have the petals be shorter on one end and longer on the other. You could dip your brush in white, yellow, and one of the reds at the same time too. You can even kind of do just like little globs of paint to give the illusion that there's flowers without like painting in every little detail. I definitely like it when it looks like there's some coming off the edges of the canvas. All right, so I think we are about ready to start filling some of our daisies in. So if it's not completely dry, it's okay, you can still start, but if you're getting like a ton of white, then you might want to wait a minute. So I am going to be using this same size brush, and you can get a little extra yellow if you need it. We're going to use quite a bit of yellow. And I'm going to start filling these babies in. So I'm starting off with just some plain yellow. For this one, I'm going to do kind of yellow tips, and I'm going to do some red near the center. So it's okay if you don't completely match up. No one is going to notice. And you can even have some of the white be like a little highlight. So I've gone over those with yellow, and now I'm going to take my brush, just wipe it on the side a little bit, and I'm going to grab some of my cadmium cadmium red light, and I'm going to do brush strokes starting from the middle of the flower and going up. You want to do it while that paint is still wet too, so that it kind of blends in. And I can make it even more intense by adding just a teeny bit of the cadmium red medium right here at the beginning, just to make that really bright. And then without cleaning my brush, if I want to go ahead and add in the stem, I can do that. I can leave this red on my brush, and because red makes green neutral, right? Because it's its opposite. So you can get a nice neutral green there. So I'm going to mix some red, some green, and I'm going to get some yellow. And I'm going to make sure my brush is decently wet. And I'm going to add a little bit of green here. And it's almost like you're doing the same thing you were doing with the petals. but you're doing it really, really small. And if my brush gets, if I don't like it when the texture of the canvas shows most of the time, so if that happens, I just get my brush wet and go over it. So I'm going to give it a little bit of roundness at the bottom too. And let's see what else. You know, we could do some really thin leaves coming off of that by just doing little lines kind of running next to it. Okay. So now I'm going to move on to my next daisy. So I'll do that big one next. So I'm going to clean my brush out in my water. And actually, this one seems to have the thickest paint, so I'm going to do this one here next. So again, I'm going to take plain yellow first. And I'm going to start brushing over my petals. And you know what you'll find is if the white paint is still a little too wet, what's going to happen is it's going to remove the paint. So mine is still a little bit too wet. So I'm just going to hang tight and let this underpainting dry just a little bit more before we move on. All right, so we let that dry a little bit. We're going to get back in there. Got my size 4 pointed round, and I'm going to take just yellow to start off with. And we'll go and finish this little guy down here. So again, just doing the first layer of yellow. And getting it all filled in. And I think with this one, I'm going to do red coming out of the center too, like I did with the other one. And if you want to have white highlights, I really like, so I don't really believe in painting super realistic. I do think it's important to get to that point for your technique and for your skill, but we have cameras for that, you know, we have photography for that. I don't see any point in painting like that. So when I paint, I like to do it very kind of painterly. I want it to look like brush strokes. So you can also dip in white at the same time if you want to have some kind of bright highlights on some of them. You can do that too. Also, these kinds of daisies, they kind of have a little bit of wrinkliness to them. So there'll be folds in the petals. So if you have some streaks of white and streaks of yellow, that can help give that appearance of those streaks. Okay, So now I'm going to do some red coming in from the center. So I'm going to wipe my brush off. I'm going to take my cadmium red light. And again, I'm going to brush from the center outwards. And I'm going to try to do it petal by petal, okay? And I'm lightly kind of flicking my brush. If you press down hard all the way through, your brush stroke is going to end with a very abrupt kind of chunky mark, and it won't look like it's just fading out. So we want it to look like it's just fading out. And if you wanted to blend it in more, you could either take yellow and come back from the outside and go towards the red. Or you could brush over the red with the yellow going outwards. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some kind of dark shadow petals. So I'm going to use red for these, and I'm going to have these be kind of underneath. Maybe these ones are kind of little shadows. You can pick any of them to be your little shadow petals. You may even have that one be a little bit of a shadow. And I'll show you after I get some of these shadow petals in here. We're going to make it stand out even more. You know, I like that bright red. I'm going to even go a little bit brighter here in the center on some of these. Okay. So you can even take some of your bright red and just very lightly outline a couple of your petals, maybe along the bottom. And that can add a little bit of separation. And now I'm going to go through and I'm going to add some of those bright petals on top again. So you can do white and yellow. And we'll do some overlapping. So right on top of this kind of shadow petal, we can see, oh, there's a really bright petal right over the top of that. And I'm going to take just plain white and I'm just going to add a little highlight to these ones that are right along this edge here. And I can go over and add a little bit of yellow on top of those later. That'll really help those kind of stand out. Okay, so next we can go ahead and we'll fill in these petals and then we'll do the centers on both of them. So for that next one, I'm just going to clean out my brush just to start fresh. And I'm going to come in there with plain yellow to start off with. And I'm going to start going over my petals. Okay. So I got some nice kind of bright yellow petals. Now the next thing I want to do is definitely add a little bit of shadow to some of these. So I'm going to take yellow, I'm going to mix a little bit of my cadmium red, and I'll even take a teeny tiny dab of black to neutralize that a little bit. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to go underneath some of these petals here. Okay, you can even add some new ones that are underneath, or you can just kind of use the ones that you have. So this one's on top here, so I'm going to come along and add a little shadow to this one. So basically anywhere I see I have these ones on top, I'll go underneath and add a little shadow. And you can even add in some new petals if you want to. Okay, so now I'm going to start to get a little more painterly, a little more streaky. So I am going to first be dipping my brush in the yellow, and at the same time I'm going to dip in my cadmium red light, and I'm going to use that to get some kind of crazy streaks on some of these petals. So dipping in the yellow, dipping in a teeny bit of that cadmium. You can do some yellow streaks over some of your shadow petals that you did. And I can even have some streaks kind of coming out of my center. So I'm going to go in and make sure that I have some fresh yellow paint here in the center. But then I'm going to take some of my cadmium red light. I'm going to do some streaks out with that. So after I get those in, I really want this flower to pop a little bit more than the rest. So I will be doing very, very light yellow over the top. But before I do that, we're going to get just one last layer of dark shadow. So I'm taking a little detail brush and some red and black mixed together and not very much water. And I'm going to come in and just get some a little bit darker shadows here. Maybe right under this one. Just in a couple spots. And I'll do just a couple more red shadows on some of these little petals back here. Okay, so now I'm going to come in and I'm going to take white and yellow and mix those together to make a very, very light yellow. And you could even get in with like a super bright yellow if you wanted to. Like, let's see what we have over here. Let's do cadmium yellow light if you have it. And I'm going to take that and get some really kind of bright yellow on top of some of these. It's like this one, this one. And I am mixing in a little bit of my cadmium yellow medium because that yellow is just a little crazy for what I'm trying to do here. So I'm adding kind of a new layer on top here. That's a little bit brighter. Especially up here at the top. I want it to be like the sun is just hitting these ones up here. And you can see it's starting to get just a little bit more depth. Okay. So I'll take that light color and maybe do just a few highlights on the ends of some of my other ones, or in the middles even. Just some light little streaks just to kind of bring them together a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to start getting these two stems in on these ones. You can clean out your brush if it's really filled with paint. And again, take yellow, green. If you want a little bit more neutral, you can add some black, add some red. And then I'm going to dip my brush in some of that lighter yellow. And I'm going to figure out where I want this stem to be. And you can go over it more than once. So down here at the bottom, I'm going to add some extra black. And then up at the top, I'll add some extra yellow. Okay. And now I can add some leaves kind of coming out. Add a little bit of more black as like a shadow. And you can come down and do this one. And maybe they have a little bit of highlight on the ends of the leaves. You can dip in your pale yellow. I think this one needs a little highlight. And I can go over this one now that that's dried a little bit. And you could add some lighter green in there. And then you could also go in and add some darker green. Right at the beginning there. Okay, so let's go ahead and start on our centers. So we're going to be using our bristle brush, but we're going to do the smaller one this time. And there's a lot of different ways you could do this. It's kind of up to you. I would start with your little flower first, and then you can go to your main one. So dip that in your water, squeeze out any excess water. And so for the centers, we're going to use this brush as a stamp to get some nice texture, and you can pretty much use any of the colors that you've been using. So if here's one of my flower centers, I can use some yellow, and I can basically kind of stamp a little circle, and then inside that circle, I could stamp some of my red. First, I'll start off with some red, and I'll just stamp that in the middle there. And then right in the middle of that, I'm going to take, I think, just black. And as long as you do it on top of the red while it's wet, then it won't come out pure black. It'll kind of blend in a little bit. And if your brush is too big for any of your flowers, you can really do this with any brush. I don't use my pointed brushes to do this because it'll kind of run the brush. So I won't do that, but I can come in with this one, this little teeny detail brush, and I can first kind of stamp around that to get a little bit of a outline. And I'm just barely tapping my brush. And on top of that black, I'm gonna do even, carry a little bit of that black out for some shadow. On top of that black, I'm gonna take some of my nice pale yellow that I made before. And I'll do a little bit of that right on top, just dabbing it. And you can even dab some on top of the red. And I'll give a nice little bit of a highlight there. Okay. So if you feel like the center looks weird at all, it's probably because it doesn't look like the petals are overlapping. So in some parts you want the center to be overlapping, but in some other parts you want the petals to be overlapping. So if they're not, just take some paint, and on a couple of them, go in and act like those are kind of on top. You can paint them right over the top. You can even come in with some of your black and add just a little bit of a shadow. Mix in some water so that it's not so intense. I'm getting it just nice and dark here where the center meets the petals. And then I feel like especially right here in the front, we want these petals to look like they're on top. So you either can wait till it dries, or you can take some nice kind of thick paint and lightly brush over some of these so that they end up looking like they're on top. And we did talk about doing a little bit of yellow over some of those white highlights that we did later on, so we can take care of that now. And take just plain yellow. And go over some of these. I'm going to leave some of it just plain white, but I'll go over a few of them. But you can see how doing that with these petals in the front here really makes them look like they're a little bit in front of the center. And that helps. I still feel like I need just a little bit of shadow on this side. And you could add that shadow in with red too. Your darker cadmium red. Okay, so now it's time for our big flower. So I'm going to start fresh with my brush, and I know what I want to do with this center. I for sure want to do red for the outer ring and black for the inner ring. So I'm going to take just red first, and I'm going to use my darker cadmium red. So I'm going to use the cadmium red medium. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to use my little stamping technique. And look, that's a glob of paint. That's too much. So I'm going to stamp some of it off on the side here. And then right in the middle of that, I'm going to put some black. And then we can take our little detail brush and we can go in and edit that a little bit. Okay. So now I'm going to take my detail brush. And this works better if you have not a super thin one, but a little bit bigger. This is a size 0. It's not like a 00, anything like that. And I'm going to start off with just red first. A tap. Making sure my edges are kind of messy. And then I'm going to come in with the black. Doing little globs. And I can carry that black out into the red. I'm doing lots of little brush strokes, but especially in the center of it, I want it really black. Now, if you want to add some little yellow highlights onto the red part, you can get just a little bit on your brush and just kind of dab that in some areas. And then the last thing, same thing that we did on the other one, we need to carry the shadow in. So I'm going to get my brush wet. And I'm going to start off, I'll just choose plain cadmium red medium to start off. And I'm going to take this color and I'm going to add some shadows coming out from the center here. Okay, so that helps it kind of blend in a little bit, but it's still not looking quite how I want it. So I'm going to do some fresh globs of red again. And I'm going to come in and do a little bit of detailing on these petals right here in the front. So I'm going to start off just plain white first. And I'm adding plain white to the ends of some of these because they just need to pop a little bit more than they are. And now, while that's still wet, I'm going to go in with some of my yellow, my cadmium yellow medium, and go over some of that. If you pick up too much red or anything like that, you can just go back and grab more. And let's see. Take a little bit of black, teeniest little bit. And I'm just going to lightly, and it's kind of hard because the paint is pretty thick right now. But I'm lightly going to go around this red just a little bit to make it a little more defined. Yeah, I like that a lot better. And you can still stamp the bright red over most of it, but that little bit of black edge makes it like a little bit more defined. And I feel like maybe the center is not quite big enough, so I'm going to push it out even a little bit more. And then again, come in with that black. Yeah, well, I got some major yellow right here. So that's what you get for resting your hand on the side. So don't do that. Don't do what I do. So it's okay. We can just paint over that. Okay. So you definitely want to take a step back and see what you think before you move on. All right, so the next thing we need is kind of a nice layer of grass here in the front. Whatever brush you feel comfortable doing this with, you can. You could use the edge of your Filbert brush. You could use your size 4 pointed round, whatever you want to do. You are going to need quite a bit of paint if you want to do it thicker. And you could also use your size 12 bristle. So you know what, I'll start off with that and show you guys that. So you clean it out in your water. Keep it kind of damp. And I'm just kind of, I'm not rubbing it together because I don't want to lose all of the variation that I have there. But I am going to do some brush strokes when I added a little bit of white, and I'm going to do some brush strokes going down. Now I'm going to get in there and do those thicker ones in the front. So I'm going to get like a lot of paint and a lot of water on my brush, and I'm really going to just go to town. So you can take some of your white and yellow and add some nice little highlights. So as you can see, I'm just kind of going crazy. And adding in lots of movement and lots of nice green leaves. All right, so that's pretty much it. You can continue to kind of layer and add on more and more if you'd like, or you can leave it just like this. You could have, you could go in and have some of your smaller flowers that you did before. You could have those stand out a little bit more, do another layer on those. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys a quick little technique you can do. If you get to a point where you're finished with the painting, but you feel like it's still just like missing something, but you don't want to go and paint something on there because you're afraid to mess it up, then what you can do is you can tear off little pieces of paper and add in what elements you're trying to add in. So I'm kind of thinking about having some petals blowing in the wind. So what I can do is I can tear off some little pieces of yellow paper and just kind of place them on to see what that would look like before I actually go in and do it. And you know, I think I kind of like that. I think that will really make this painting feel and look finished. So after I do it, I can take them off. I like the way it looks. I'm going to take my pointed brush and just some plain white paint. And whenever you want to do petals blowing in the wind, you want to make it look like they're kind of taking off from the actual flower. So right here where the actual flower is, I'm going to do a larger one. So it's not connected, but it looks like it just kind of took off in the wind. And then they're going to get smaller as they get further away. So I'm definitely going to have them big to small. Make that one even a little bit bigger. And as they go off into the distance, and have them fade into just little dots. And I like how they look like they're kind of moving with the clouds too. So after you get it in white, same thing as we've been doing before, you can just paint some yellow over it after it dries a little bit. So I do want plain yellow, and my plate is turned into a hot mess over here. And clean my brush out a little bit. Grab some fresh yellow paint. So wipe your brush off on a paper towel or something before you come in and go onto these little ones at the top, because you don't want those to stand out. You want them to look like they're really far away. And then these ones up here in the front, you want those to look like they just took right off the flowers, so those can be a lot brighter. And I'm going to even dip my brush in white and yellow at the same time. Get one of these really Yeah, now we're talking. Okay. Yeah, I just kind of like the way that looks, if they're just kind of blowing off in the wind. And it would kind of come to a point, even where it kind of separated. So just go over that. So I decided to add a little bonus clip. So what I'm going to do is I wanted to add a couple more things to the painting. So I'm going to add some more clouds, and I'm also going to add some more flowers and just kind of create a little more balance. Was a little out of balance before. So the first thing I'm going to do is brighten up this flower on the left. So I'm using my size 4 round pointed brush just to add a little bit more white. When you kind of squint your eyes and look at the picture, you can see the two flowers on the right are so bright and so vibrant. And this one over here on the left really kind of got lost. And that caused the whole right side of the painting to be very strong and the left to be a little bit weaker. So that made it a little bit out of balance. So I'm just adding a little bit more paint. And you can see how just a little bit of white paint makes it more opaque and makes it really, really stand out against the background. So I'm adding a little bit more of my cadmium red medium. And that's also going to really brighten up this flower. So I'm taking that same brush and just adding a little bit of that to the bottom, and I'm doing brush strokes starting at the base of the flower and very, very lightly brushing upwards towards the end of the petal. And I have a very light touch. Remember, if you press down hard, then it's going to make kind of thick, blocky marks. I'm going to brighten up this little flower over here as well. So I'm grabbing my detail brush now. And just making the green area a little bit more vibrant. So what I'm doing right here is I'm just adding a little bit of shadow underneath the flowers. So the flower, the top of the flower would cast a shadow onto the stem. So I'm just grabbing a little bit of a darker tone, so you can do green and red mixed together, green and black, and a little detail brush, and just add that right underneath the heads of the flowers. And that just makes it stand out a little bit more and look a little bit more realistic. And I'm also going to make it a little bit darker over here on this flower. So the next thing we're going to do is add some more clouds over here on the left. I just really want it to have this kind of rolling cloud feel to it. So I'm just mixing up some more of our periwinkle colors. So I've gone back to the size 4 Filbert brush, and I mixed together some of that primary blue with some violet and white. And it's kind of difficult to match a color, but if you just keep playing with it, you'll get it to a point where it can kind of blend in. And if it still looks like it's really kind of standing out too much, you can always add a little bit of water and that can help too. So I'm just doing little brush strokes that are kind of U-shaped. I'm using the flat side of my brush and I'm doing the under part of the cloud first. So I'm doing some U-shaped brush strokes in the darker periwinkle color and remembering to do variation in sizes. So some of them are big, some of them are small. So I'm just going in and adding in lots of little cloud marks. I'm going up towards the top corner of the left side of the canvas. And I'm down about 4 or 5 inches, and that's where I'm kind of ending it. I'm going to clean my brush out, dab it on my paper towel, and I'm using just a damp brush to kind of feather it in, just blend it in a little bit. So now I'm just creating a little more form to the clouds. So I've got my lighter color, so it's white, but it's a little bit of the periwinkle mixed in so that it's not too bright. And I'm using the same U shape, but this time it's kind of bending upwards like an arch. And what really makes them look like clouds is when you kind of layer them on top of each other. So I'll go across and do the first layer at the top. Very light little marks, then come down a little bit. And I feel like that's what works best for me, is if I start at the top and work down. And notice I have a damp brush and I only am dipping one side of the brush in a little bit of white or light periwinkle. And that way it'll kind of blend as you go and you don't have to keep going over it. So there I'm just going through and adding a little bit of white underneath. So next I'm going to start adding in a couple more flowers. So I am using the edge of my Filbert brush. And I'm going to add a little flower right here in the middle. And with these ones, I'm not taking so much care to be very precise. It's more about just getting the splashes of color and kind of keeping it kind of painterly. So now I've switched to my detail brush and I'm using white and the cadmium yellow deep. I'm just filling in those petals. Now I'm going to use my detail brush to grab some of my red. I'm using the cadmium red light to add a little center. So I'm again using that same kind of stamping technique. You can add a little bit of the darker color in the middle, and do the black or the red and black or red and green mixed together. So now I'm going to add another flower over here on the right side. So I'm using my size 4 pointed round again. And I'm starting off with just white paint like we did before. And at first the brush strokes are kind of bending downwards and they start to bend upwards. And then you want to go in and make them a little bit uneven, make some stand out more than others. Now I'm going to go in with yellow, just like before, same technique. Adding the yellow over the top. So now I'm taking the same brush and some red paint, and I'm doing some brush strokes starting on the tips of the petals and brushing in towards the center. And then I'm also adding a little bit of red from the center going out. So the very last thing is just to make the background a little more vibrant. So I'm using my size 12 bristle brush, and I'm dipping again in the yellow and the cadmium red light at the same time, and just kind of stamping some little globs of paint just to make the background stand out a little bit more. Thank you so much for painting with me today. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I post new painting videos every week, and we'll see you next time.